All right, ESPN FPI has released their projections to make the college football playoff and more. For the first time ever, South Carolina a favorite? Locked On Gamecocks starts right now.
You are Locked On Gamecocks, your daily podcast on the South Carolina Gamecocks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, guys? Welcome into Locked On Gamecocks. I'm your host, Chris Marler, and it's a great Wednesday afternoon, evening show for you today, and we've got a good one for you. Before we get into it, I do want to say thank you to everyone making Locked On Gamecocks your first listen each and every day. Shout out to our everydayers. Remember, we're a free and available podcast wherever you get your podcasts, as well as on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Now, today's episode brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Go to FanDuel.com to get started today. Okay, we are back. We have a good show for you today, like I said. We're fresh off an appearance on Feinbaum, which was a lot of fun. Good to talk about some SEC football on there. And today we're not going to talk as much about SEC football as we're going to talk about USC football and where they stand in terms of the SEC and projections from ESPN FPI. Now, normally I would tell you wholeheartedly that ESPN FPI is something you would take with there's taking something with a grain of salt, and then there's trusting ESPN FPI. But for the first time in a really long time, South Carolina has some favorable numbers for ESPN FPI. And for the first time in a long time, you're on the heels of when the ESPN FPI kind of already told you last year exactly where you should expect South Carolina to be, and they were right. So is it necessarily time to trust ESPN FPI? I don't know about all that, but I will say the projections they have for South Carolina football this year are the most favorable they have been in quite some time. Now, these updates come from their power ranking system from ESPN FPI or from ESPN. And here's what I always say about them. You can sit here and think like their ranking system is very flawed. It's very flawed. The ranking system itself, very flawed. But the ranking system that is taken into account. Not only does the ranking system where they rank in FPI, strength of record and strength of schedule are both factored into where the College Football Playoff Committee, I guess, ranks each team moving into November, December rankings going into the college football playoff. So, are the rankings flawed? Absolutely they are. But stuff like strength of record and strength of schedule are two things that are factored into the where each team lands in the 12-team and now 14, now 16-team college football playoff rankings that the committee will choose from. So I always say this, when you're talking about the FPI rankings, the biggest flaw I've ever seen with these rankings, right? There's a couple of years ago, going into the season, they had Mississippi State ranked 8th. And you're like, what? And I think they won 7 games tops. It might have been 6. Might have been 5. But it was a very noticeable flaw. The biggest flaw I've ever seen with these rankings is 2019, LSU obviously not only wins the national championship, but one of the best teams of all time. That team beat Alabama, and for 2 weeks after, they were still ranked behind Alabama. So from just the ranking standpoint, yes, I think you take this with a grain of salt. But the strength of record, the strength of schedule, those things are factored in, no matter what you think about them, into the College Football Playoff Committee's rankings. And then on top of that, their projections, you saw this last year firsthand, the projections and odds they have of reaching the College Football Playoff, those things were very accurate last year. And it was pretty accurate with South Carolina because South Carolina never really crept up over, I think, 30-something% to make the playoff, even though they were on a 6-game win streak, even though they were one of the hottest teams in the country. They did everything they had to do to make the college football playoff. We saw firsthand that wasn't necessarily something that was going to happen because of FPI. Now, where does FPI have South Carolina this year? I'm glad you asked. It has South Carolina projected between 7 and 7.5 wins, so 7.3 wins, 4.8 losses. So basically 7 and 5 is where the projection's at, right? It has an 82% chance to win over 6 games, a 1.8% chance to win the conference, and this is where it gets interesting. 1% chance to win the national championship, 2.6% chance to win or to make the national championship game, and then a 20.3% chance to make the college football playoff. Those odds may not sound like a lot, but going into the season, I'll remind you that those odds were roughly around 3% a season ago, and you're at 20% going into the season. It also ranks 9th in the conference in terms of how many teams are ahead of you. Texas, Georgia, Alabama, those are the teams that are up at the top. Then you have the teams in the middle that I think that South Carolina continuously is put behind for some reason. A&M, Tennessee, LSU, Ole Miss, Auburn. Now, I personally think when looking at those teams ahead of you, you basically need to figure out a way to be in the top 4, right? We saw it last year. I don't necessarily think those 3 that we have at the top, Texas, Georgia, and Bama, are going to are concrete at the top 3. But if you could figure out a way to beat A&M and LSU, Ole Miss, you get those 3 games. If you win 2 of those 3 games, then you're in very good standing. The other part of this is the fact that when you look at where the projections lie from last year to this year, like I said, the numbers are way different. Last year, you were talking about being the 15th team in the conference of where you projected, 14th or 15th. It was everyone but, I believe, Mississippi State and Vandy that you were behind, and now you're over here at 9th in the conference moving forward. It feels like a really good time for South Carolina. Like, it feels like a really good time for South Carolina athletics. And like going into last season at this time, because we're kind of on the heels of this being me doing this for 1 year completely, and kind of seeing where things ended up or things were a year ago versus this year, it's a lot more positive. Not only on the recruiting trail, but I talked about this with ESPN FPI and where you're projected. I think that when you look at South Carolina moving forward, it does very much feel like this team and this program have turned the corner in terms of national relevancy, where they are talked about in a different light. For some reason, that has not necessarily translated inside the SEC. And that's a very weird thing to happen. I think it's one of those things. It's like when you look at national media is very, very high on South Carolina. They're high on the players that go into the draft next year. We're going to talk about in the second part of the show. One thing Todd McShay said about LaNorris Sellers, they're high on where they're projected to go in bowl games. They're high in terms of how many wins they should have and projections on going to the college football playoff. They're high in the recruiting trail. And some of the recruiting battles they're in right now, they're getting predictions and projections of different players all over the map that are high level recruits. It's like, so all of these positive things are happening for South Carolina across the country or on a bigger scale. But for the first time, that feels like for the first time in a very long time, if maybe in the last decade, but for some reason, inside the confines of the SEC, they are still kind of put on the back burner behind some teams that I feel like they have surpassed. A&M, Auburn, some of those teams that are listed, they're listed behind. I feel like they've kind of surpassed them. So there's a lot to go into there's a lot that's going to happen between now and the end of November when this team plays its 12th and final regular season game. But in the meantime, and before the season starts, you have to love where this team is currently projected at, because it feels like for the first time, and maybe it's something you'd rather fly under the radar a little bit, but it feels like for the first time in a really long time, probably over a decade, you're finally getting the love and the attention and accurate admiration for this program. And I think that like rankings don't really matter as much, but when you talk about being discussed and spoken about from a national standpoint in the same breath as some of these LSU, Bama, Texas, Georgia, Ohio State, Michigan on the recruiting trail, like all of that stuff, when you're finally getting acknowledged accurately and validly, I think that's a word. That's the kind of thing that feels like it's very long overdue, and it's finally happening for this program. And it's been deserved for a while, but it's finally happening right now. All right, when we come back, we're going to talk about what Todd McShay said about LaNorris Sellers going into this season, next year's draft class, and just how high that ceiling is. We've talked about it before, but I don't think we talked about it at this level. The ceiling that has just been set, the comps that are being made for him are something that are remarkable going into this season. Before we do that, we're going to talk about our good friends over at FanDuel. Now, you guys have heard me talk about FanDuel before. You're going to hear me talk about them again because right now is as good of a time as ever to join in on the fun over at FanDuel. The NBA playoffs are in full swing. The NBA finals start tomorrow. Every night delivers highlight-worthy performances, major momentum shifts, and can't-miss moments. Whether it's a game-winning shot or a breakout player, there's never been a better time to get on the action. FanDuel makes it easy to stay in the game before tip-off and live with player props, player performance trends, same-game parlays, and more. Fans have more ways than ever to play smart and win big. Personally, I love diving into the player props, how many threes a player is going to hit, how many points, assists, anything in between. Tyrese Halliburton's been awesome throughout the playoffs. I'm sure he will continue to be. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander has also been incredible for OKC. Should be a fun one in the NBA Finals. Now, before we go away and go into the second, I have to remind you, because like I said at the top of this, now is as good a time, if not the best time ever, to join in on the fun at FanDuel, because right now, if you're new to FanDuel, head to FanDuel.com, place your first $5 bet, and if it wins, you'll get $200 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, we'll be right back with more Locked On Gamecocks right after this. All right, Todd McShay, one of my favorites, ESPN draft analyst, NFL draft guys you've seen for years and years and years. He has kind of had like a return, I feel like, to prominence. Not maybe prominence isn't the right word, but just significant relevance. Part of that is because I think he just kind of took some time off of doing the college football thing, and now he's focused back again on the NFL draft. And he has already been very, very confident in some of his predictions for next year and the pre-draft process going into 2026's NFL draft and the players that will be involved. Everyone pretty much across the board seems to have Garrett Nussmeier as the number one overall quarterback. Now, there's a lot of other draft-eligible quarterbacks that are going to be playing. I think the Mateer kid from Oklahoma is a guy that's been getting some love. Obviously, Nico, the kid from Tennessee, even though he's at UCLA now, he's going to be in his junior year. You've seen him projected in the first round in some places, which is shocking to me. And then, of course, you have the hometown hero, LaNorris Sellers, who is also being talked about in that same vein to be a potential number one overall pick. And a top high end of the first round, top 10, top 5 type pick of the NFL draft as well. I have heard, like, it's good to hear NFL scouts praise LaNorris because I feel like a lot of fans won't. And I don't know why that is. There's this very weird perception that's being and narrative that's being driven primarily by fans. So it doesn't really matter. But like this very weird perception that's driven by fans that LaNorris Sellers is not a good thrower of the football, not accurate, doesn't have a great arm, whatever. I think being hesitant about where you'd project LaNorris Sellers is one thing, because you really had 6 games where you saw him at his highest level last year. And a lot of the other part of it is a projection, it feels like, right? Like what would have happened if he was on the field against LSU, or what would have happened if he had a full season? Are we going to see what we saw for the last 6 games of last year across all 12 to potentially 16 if they can reach national championship games this year? So I think those are all very fair questions. What is going on here? What is this? Anyway, so those are I think fair questions, because having a smaller sample size, even though he played for most of the season, I understand it. We still haven't seen him play for every single game of the 12-game schedule. Now, that kind of hesitancy I get, but the hesitancy based off of ignorance is what we're also seeing. And it's kind of hilarious to see just how inaccurate it is. And I'm not going to get into why I think the inaccuracies are. I think a lot of times when you see a 6'2", 6'3", 240-pound athlete that looks like LaNorris Sellers, there's a tendency to maybe incorrectly and unfairly group him into, oh, he's a dual threat guy, he's a run-first guy. we saw all season last year how good he was throwing the football. All season we saw it. And we saw it especially in the last 6 games of the season. And think about this. You saw what he was able to do last year with that group of receivers that he had and tight ends. And now that has gotten not just better, but like significantly better. Significantly better. I brought this up 1,000 times before. There's no way the offensive line can be worse than it was the last 2 years. There's just no way. I mean, I would be hard pressed to think that it somehow regresses even further, even though you're breaking in 3 new guys across the interior of that offensive line. I think you went and got some good bodies. You get some good incoming freshmen. You had some guys already on the roster that you've now been able to have like a little bit of depth to, right? So I think that there's no way everything around him, besides maybe the running back position, ends up being an improvement. Rocket Sanders was awesome. I'm hoping that the NCAA can get their stuff together sometime soon, and I, like bringing in Faison would be a huge deal. It's also very frustrating that it hasn't been confirmed yet, but I fully expect him to be in the fold and playing on the field with the starters day one when they open up against Virginia Tech 88 days from now. Now, all that being said, the talent around him has gotten significantly better. I think he's only going to improve. Guys, keep in mind, too, he's a first-year starter in the SEC, in the toughest conference in the country. First-year starter. And on top of that, like he's going into year 3, but it's only his second year like playing consistently. This kid, like another year in the weight room, another year watching film, getting to go in every single day with a guy like Mike Shula, who is going to sit here and as a first-year offensive coordinator in the system, like the person he's going to build everything around is LaNorris Sellers. I think there's times last year when you looked at the way Dowell Loggins called games that he probably was like, you know what, let's build this game plan around Rocket Sanders. Let's build this game plan around play action pass, but everything's still kind of focused from that part into LaNorris Sellers. I don't think in the first half of the season you saw game plans that were solely built off of how good LaNorris Sellers is. And part of that's because he was new to being a starting quarterback. And also the competition was very, very tough. And I don't know how long the leash was from Dowell Loggins and company going to last year. I think it's going to be a lot longer this year. And you're going to get more of the playbook catered to what he can do in his skill set. Because there's a lot more trust involved from both sides, but especially from a coaching standpoint of what he's able to do. All of that on top of what Todd McShay said. Todd McShay, he was on his podcast and they were asking about like, what's your comp for LaNorris Sellers? I have heard Jalen Hurts. I have heard Cam Newton, but the Cam Newton thing, like just from a physical standpoint, not necessarily like the generational type thing where, he's going to be like, listen, Cam Newton is a one-of-one guy, but I've heard those comps. Taller Jalen Hurts is the one that surprised me the most because up until this point, you had not heard. Yeah, you know what he reminds me of? He reminds me of the guy that just won the Super Bowl, that just won the MVP, and just signed a $250 million contract. The other one I heard, and there were 3 guys they put him across. They're like, the 3 guys you constantly hear, Jalen Hurts, or is it 2 guys you constantly hear, Jalen Hurts and Lamar Jackson? I have not heard Lamar Jackson. I think those are 2 different, very different body types at the very least. Lamar Jackson's a phenomenal talent, right? Like, I mean, he's incredible. He's got to be faster than LaNorris, I would think, right? Like, obviously he's shiftier, right? But at the same time, like what LaNorris is able to do at his size and not go down as easily. I mean, that's just a phenomenal comp. You're the first 2 guys you have been compared to are the guys that won the last 2 MVPs in the NFL. The third one, which I had not heard yet, was Josh Allen. And the Josh Allen thing surprised me because when you're talking about like the 3 guys, none of the 3 that you brought up were projects. None of the 3 that you brought up, or these 2 brought up, were middle of the pack or middle tier type quarterbacks. It was all top 5 level quarterbacks in the NFL currently, and that's who they're drawing comparisons to LaNorris Sellers. If that is the case, the idea that even I've had of being like hesitant to where you think the projection should be going into next year should probably be thrown out. Because if you have that level of talent at quarterback, and he is truly that like capable of those things physically, with what they've now put around him, because this will be the most talented roster South Carolina's had in a very long time. Okay. If now is you have all of those pieces in place and he is truly that level of athlete, that level of not just athlete, but that level of quarterback, pressing pause or being hesitant about how good this team could be, whether it be from superstition, whether it be from a place of just pessimism, or whatever, throw it out the window. Because if he is at that level with what he has around him, the ceiling for this team is much, much higher than anyone's expecting. So it has this feeling, I think in summation here, I feel like going to last year, there was this constant feeling of like trying to like break through this like ceiling of like, oh, you know, like people are saying 5.5 wins, 6 wins. Like you're just trying to break through that ceiling. This year, it kind of like how high can you reach instead of how can you punch through. And I'll tell you what, if you have that like hesitations, like I said, I get it. But if he really is at that level, that's what NFL scouts are seeing, not just me saying it, not just fans saying it, not just biased people. We're talking about unbiased, objective people that have no skin in the game when it comes to college football, that are just sitting here watching tape. If that's what they're seeing, the ceiling is as high as any other team in the country, including Georgia, Texas, Alabama, Ohio State, or anybody. All right, that is all for today's episode. I appreciate you guys joining in. I hope you have a fantastic rest of your Wednesday afternoon. We'll be back tomorrow. We're going to go back into the recruiting well because South Carolina has even more crystal ball predictions they were given on Wednesday from On3, and some new potential additions to make for the 2026 class. We'll talk about that and more. Locked On Gamecocks continues then. Go Cox.